So, ladies, we've got a lot going down tonight, I have to tell you. So, we're going to start off. I'm just going to do a little brief reminder of what we talked about initially, and then we're going to dive right in because we got some really cool stuff to discuss. So, we're back into the 3 leadership gaps that nobody talks about because as I've done this for the last 15 years, I have realized that there are 3 massive gaps that most of us have no idea are holding us back from having everything we want in life. So the first gap we talked about last time, which was the imposter syndrome gap. And when that comes up, the whole concept behind that is that we really feel like we shouldn't be here. Like maybe we're not good enough. Maybe there's somebody else who's better than we are. And when we talked about it last week, we were able to identify there are a couple of different things you got to do to get out of that space. Now, I'm not going to go into all the details on that. If you want that, you got to watch the video from last week, but we're going to dive deep into the other 2 parts of the leadership gaps. So I just want to start off with what I believe. I believe that every purpose-driven entrepreneur deserves to live a passionate, connected life, exceeding her goals and living on her own terms. Because if we can step into our true calling, if we can activate the genius that is within, then we truly can step into our impact for this world. And I think every single one of us has such a unique capability to impact the world that it's really up to us to do this deep digging and figure out what it is about us. What is it about us that is so unique, so incredible that when we bring it to the world will hear us, the world will see us, and we'll be able to make the impact that we truly want. So 3 leadership gaps. We talked about that first leadership gap, but the reason why we try to address these leadership gaps is that if we learn how to fill these gaps, we activate our true genius zone. And that allows us to build more wealth in every aspect of our life, whether it's wealth in our relationships, so we can feel more connected and have more intimacy and be more seen, or it's wealth in business, which goes down to, how many clients we bring in, what the revenue is, and the money that we make and keep for our families. So that's why we're talking about the leadership gaps. And I believe that the number one reason why you are or not as successful as you want to be goes back to this leadership piece. So we talked about the leadership gap as imposter syndrome last time. We're not going to go into all the details there because there was a lot that we covered, but we are going to dive deep into leadership gap number 2. So leadership gap number 2, and this is where it might feel a little prickly because none of us like to hear the word trauma. Nobody likes that word, which is why I use it, because I feel like we've got to almost wake people up to the fact that trauma is not a bad thing. It really is not. But when we hear the word trauma, we all think that it's got to be something big, like somebody must have gone to war, somebody must have been in a car accident, somebody must have lost a child. But here's the thing. Our subconscious is so unique that it creates patterns from our trauma that we think are truth. And instead of learning what is true and what is not, we live in a story that our subconscious creates for most of our lives until usually somebody jumps in to interrupt that pattern to get us back on the right track. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this because it's my goal for everybody who leaves this call that we're more aware of what this means and we have a better idea as to how do we figure this out for ourselves so it doesn't hold us back in our lives. So your core trauma pattern, it is the biggest subconscious block to all of your happiness and all of your success. Everybody has one core pattern that was started when you were very young that you are not most times even aware you are playing into day after day, decision after decision, action after action. So we're going to start to poke at your subconscious a little bit on this call so we can try to figure out, or at least put you in the right direction to figure out what is my core trauma pattern and why does it matter? So trauma is a perceived loss of control. This is really important because most people think trauma has to be something big. It's not. It's just a moment in your mind, usually when you were a little kid, where you couldn't perceive that you had any control over the situation. So for example, you do something quote unquote bad, your mom puts you in your room, she closes the door. All of a sudden, that little kid that is you thinks, I'm not in control. I've just lost my only caregiver. What if X? So you create a story in your mind with something so small and so little that happens, and that story starts to build energy and momentum for the rest of your life. I use this example because I had a client recently. She's a 35-year-old woman. She runs a big IT company. She got locked into her room as a little kid when she was maybe 6 years old. And in her brain, she believed that she was literally cut off from the world and that everybody had died. And so she decided, I'm not going to let myself get that connected to anyone ever. And so she built a great business, but she had never been in a connected, emotionally supportive relationship. So she came to me because she was trying to figure out, well, I've made all this money in business. Why can't I get into the relationship of my dreams? We identified it, went all the way back to that pattern of when she was a little kid. And now she's actually in a beautiful relationship, making even more money than she made before. And she's so thankful that she knew where it started from so she could resolve it and move forward from it. That's why I like to give real life examples, because unless you know what these things are, they're so subtle. You might mistake them. You might walk right past them. You might not even think that they're causing you an issue. So, what I've learned over the past 15 years of working with tons of people on their trauma patterns is that a human being acts in accordance with what she believes to be true. So, in your mind, there's some story that you've created that you believe is true. I use this example of the green and the white iPhone because if I believe my iPhone is green and I say to you, hey, pass me the green iPhone, and you look at my iPhone and you're like, your iPhone has a white color, Annie. It's a cover that's white. You're not going to pass me that iPhone. We won't be able to coordinate action together because what I'm seeing is so different than what you're seeing. So when we think about this, if we believe something to be true to the core of our being, and that truth is something that happened to us when we were a little kid, we're going to be confused if somebody tries to coordinate action with us on a topic that's different. I bring this up because so many times we can't really understand how trauma impacts us until we start seeing how it impacts all the decisions we make and all the stories we think about ourselves. So, the key here to remember is that all traumas in our lives, whether they're big or little, they're all just perceived losses of control, and they create lies in our subconscious that become our life strategies. So, even for me, when I was a little kid, I grew up with two younger sisters and a mom that was very busy. And I told myself when I was little, I have to help my sisters get their homework done so that I can go play and have fun later. And my mom also said, Annie, if you help your sisters get their homework done, then when they're done with their homework, then you can go play. The only problem was every time I got all their homework done, it'd be time for dinner, then bed, and I never got to play. And as I got older, I started to realize, oh my gosh, I take care of everybody else before I ever have any fun because that was the program, the lie that I created as a kid, that I have to help everybody else before I can have fun. And I played that out well into my adult years until I saw that that pattern was impacting me. Now, does this concept make sense? Is everybody tracking with me as we talk this through? Okay, so now I'm going to give you a little bit of a story that really cements this. And this is what I want you to be thinking about. If we look at trauma like we're back in cavewoman days, and I want you all to imagine for a second that you're a cavewoman, okay? So everybody close their eyes and we're just going to listen to the story for a second. So you're a cavewoman. You decide you're going to walk down from your cave. You're going to walk down to this beautiful, clear blue water. You're going to sit on a rock. You're going to have a beautiful, magical moment with yourself. You walk down to the water. You go to sit on the rock. It's this fuzzy orange and black rock. You sit on this rock and it becomes something that leaps out. It's a saber-toothed tiger and it actually almost kills you because it's such an aggressive thing and you've never seen it before, so you don't know. So you race back to your cave, you get into your cave, you're scared, you're shaken up, you're bleeding, you're trying to make sure you're healthy enough to move on with the next day, and you go to sleep that night. As you go to sleep that night after you've taken care of yourself and made sure you're not bleeding out, your brain starts to dream. As you start to dream, you replay over and over in your mind, oh my gosh, furry orange and black things will kill me. They will harm me. I have to be aware of them. I have to be aware of them and vigilant to make sure that those fuzzy orange and black things don't get me again. So all night you're replaying this story over and over and over in your subconscious. Then you wake up the next morning and you go to get out of your cave. As you look outside of your cave, you're sort of scared because you're like, what if there's a fuzzy orange and black thing outside of my cave? What if it's hiding behind the shrubbery? What if it's hiding behind the tree? So you become a little bit more hyper vigilant, a little bit more aware. And now you're looking for that tiger all over the place because you think it's going to show up when you least expect it and you're not going to be prepared. So your subconscious is doing a great job here because it's helping you identify where tigers might exist. And you're starting to build an incredible skill set because now you're becoming one of the best hunters in the entire tribe. And they're looking to you as the amazing huntress who can find and hunt down tigers because she's so aware. She's so focused. However, you don't really want to be hunting tigers. You don't want to be thinking about tigers all the time because tigers scare the heck out of you because you just had a life-altering event with the tiger. So you continue hunting until one day When next door, this tribe shows up, and the tribe is literally covered in tiger pelts because they are the hunters of all tigers and they are the best hunters in the world. And if you lived within that tribe, you would be safe. But because they have tiger pelts on them and they're fuzzy orange and black things, you are going to be repelled from that and try to get as far away from that thing that could be the safest place for you as possible, because they look just like the fuzzy orange and black thing that almost killed you. The environment has changed, but you are still in the same program of trying to hunt and find the tiger so you can stay safe, rather than in a program of, I'm going to go join that tribe so I don't have to hunt tigers anymore and I can just berry pick and enjoy my life. So everybody open up your eyes for a moment. Every single one of us has a tiger. We have something that we are looking for subconsciously all the time that we're not even aware of, that limits our ability to see the future opportunities that are standing right there in front of us that could give us everything we want. And until we identify what that tiger is, what that root pattern is, it is very hard for us to step into our true calling and to activate all the genius that is within us. Does this story help make it more realistic as to what our brain is doing to us? Does it resonate with you ladies as you hear this? So it is our job to figure out what is the tiger and how do we make sure that tiger in that program from when we were little doesn't impact every decision that we make and every action that we take. Knowing this, here's where it gets really interesting. When you have a story in your head about a tiger, you create a story, and that becomes a lie that you tell yourself over and over again. When you tell yourself that that tiger is going to hunt you and kill you, it's going to bring up a lot of ineffective emotions. You might be living in a lot of fear. There might be reactions to it, or worry, or guilt even. Those ineffective emotions cause you to take very ineffective actions or have ineffective behaviors. And then you end up in an environment and decision making that doesn't serve you and makes you feel like you're suffering. So if you were to look at any aspect of your life, I want you to think about, in what aspect of my life am I suffering? And that is where you start to identify some of these lies that are holding you back. If you live in truth instead, if you look at that for that story of the tiger and you're like, wait a second, this tiger story might not be true. But if I live in my truth of what I discover, then I have very positive and effective emotions. I have very positive and effective behaviors, and I create an environment and decision making that serves me all day long. So I live in ease. So this is why for every single woman I've ever worked with, we want to look at your life and see, where am I creating suffering? And then how do I discover the lie that comes from that suffering? Does that make sense? So if you're living in your truth, you will always be living in ease. Life will feel easy. It'll feel good. You'll be like, oh, I feel like I'm in the flow. When you live in any level of suffering in any aspect of your life, it's because there is a lie that your subconscious is telling you. There is a tiger story that your subconscious doesn't want you to know that is running that suffering. So the good news is, if we all know that we have these lies in our mind, and we all know we can identify them through the suffering that we experience, we're on our way to a solution. So what happens though if you don't discover your core trauma pattern? What happens if you don't discover your tiger? Well, you can't fully activate your genius. You can't identify your true calling. You aren't aware of the filter that you need to stay on course for business success. You end up living in a lot of the old programs and old behaviors instead of seeing all those new opportunities. And you make decisions from that 7-year-old self instead of the adult self that has access to all the learning from all the years of your life. So this really is the biggest leadership gap I see in almost everyone I've ever worked with. Now, how do we change this? How do we fix this? How do we get out of our own way? And how do we identify this tiger and move forward in our lives? First thing, we have to build a relationship with our 7-year-old self. We have to know what she likes. We have to know what she doesn't like. We have to know what makes her happy. We have to know how to give her more of what she needs so she starts to feel more safe, to let go of the story of the tiger. So what I do every morning when I wake up is I talk to my 7-year-old self and I ask her, what does she need today? What does she need from me? What would make her day better? What would help her feel more loved? And when you do that every morning, you start to build that relationship, and the fear that's been driving you to suffering starts to dissipate or release. That's the first step. Second step, if we want to identify this tiger or this core pattern, we have to identify the patterns that show up in our lives between the lowest point of our life and the highest point of my life. So when I work with women and I coach them, I'll say, okay, let's dive deep into what is the lowest point of your life. And many of us don't want to share that low point. But if we can identify the low point, we can identify the highest point of our life, we can start to look at the patterns of how we had to be in the low point versus how we had to be in the high point. And we'll start noticing that there is one thing that links those two aspects of what we've experienced in our life. So we look at what is shared between those two moments, and we look at what didn't you have in one moment of your life that you had in the other. Now, I've seen for many women, we will identify maybe it was self-identity. Maybe it was lack of emotional control. Maybe it was fear of the unknown. Every single woman has a different custom low point, high point pattern. And when you identify that, everything gets a little bit easier because you can see where you've held yourself back in the past and what your success formula has been in that highest moment of your life. So is this making sense, ladies, that we're talking about some deep stuff here, but I'm trying to break it down so we can start to see how do we get ourselves out of that old story or that old program. Okay, next part. We have to identify what are these internal parts of us that are fighting. So sometimes we've got this rebellious young teenager with this adult part of us that's fighting and causing trouble. Sometimes we got our mom selves with our entrepreneur self, like who am I as a mom versus who am I as a businesswoman, and they're fighting and causing conflict or suffering. Sometimes we've got, here's the woman I am when I'm with my spouse, and here's how I am when I'm all alone. I'm doing great in the world. There's some conflict there sometimes. And sometimes there's even conflict between obviously the younger version of us and the adult version of us, right? So I say these things because when you have a core trauma pattern, there is always a fight going on internally that you may or may not be aware of. So with each one of these things we're doing, we're removing or releasing or clearing some of these conflicts that are inside of you that are causing you to suffer. My whole goal, obviously, is to make sure nobody ever has to suffer ever again. Or if we suffer very shortly and we move on very quickly from it. So that's why I'm giving you the ways to identify where is the suffering coming from? Where are the lies for the suffering coming from? And how do we identify them so they no longer cause us harm? The last piece is you have to clear the anger, the sadness, the fear, and the guilt that is in your body and clouds your actions. Because that little girl inside has all those feelings that have never been processed. And if we don't know how to do that, then we store all that in our body, and our body then feels, tiredness or exhaustion or even injury much faster. So what I like to ask all my clients is I'm like, what are you angry about that you haven't let go of? What are you sad about that you still hold on to? What do you fear that you don't take action because of? And what do you feel guilty for that limits your growth? The first step is to identify these different emotions and to figure out what we're still holding on to from those emotions in our past. And then for me, what I love about this is I can clear these emotions for you in a process that allows you to literally open up to more possibility in your life because those emotions aren't holding you back. I just did this with a lady the other day who was she literally has not slept more than an hour or two every night. And we ran this through for her. And she literally told me, she's like, I have no anger about my sleep anymore. It's the weirdest thing. She's like, I slept for 4 hours. And I was like, great. And she's like, and then I woke up and I went back to sleep for 3 hours. And I'm like, well, great. It looks like we resolved something then, right? So it's amazing. And another great book to read is Your Body Keeps the Score. If you want to better understand how this all works in your body. And another great book, I'm just going to pull this one out here. It's called Feelings Buried Alive Never Die. I bring this up because you can look up what like pain you're feeling in your body that is linked to what's going on emotionally for you. Because it really helps you identify, what do I need to let go of if I want to step into this next best version of myself? And the last piece that I like to bring up is when you are in this state and you are trying to find these core trauma patterns, I always like to have you ask yourself, what do I want to be true in this moment? Because if there's a lie that we're suffering in, we can ask ourselves, what do I want to be true? And live into that truth, which is the shortcut in your brain for a new neural pathway. So I use this question probably 5 to 10 times a day. anytime you get triggered, anytime you get upset, instead of focusing on the negative story that you're creating from what's triggering you or making you upset, I instead say to myself, what do I want to be true? And I write down on a sheet of paper, I'd like this to be true instead. So, for example, if you're ever triggered by your spouse or your significant other, and you're like, gosh, they just don't value me, they don't understand me, I write down on a piece of paper, what do I want to be true? I want it to be true that my spouse loves me beyond measure. I want it to be true that my spouse sees me and understands me. I want it to be true that everything I want in my life is coming together for me. And if I write those things down, it allows me to step out of that negative story and out of that suffering into a much better reality. Now, give me 1 second, ladies. There seems to be a little problem with my computer battery. I just want to make sure it's in the wall. Give me 1 sec. Oh, yes, we had a little bit of an issue with it coming out of the wall. All right, never a dull moment. So we're back. We're back. So when something happens that makes you upset, instead of letting yourself go down the suffering journey of that negative story, what are we going to do instead? We're going to ask ourselves, what do I want to be true? And write out at least 5 things that are true or that you want to be true, and then decide to live into those truths to get yourself out of some of that fear-based suffering that you brought up. Okay. All right, ladies, are we still tracking on all this? Because we've got a couple of great things that are going to help us get out of it. But now we have to go into the third leadership gap. So this is the thing that I have found beyond anything else I coach and teach on. If you don't deal with your nervous system, it's going to lead you down the wrong path and the wrong neural pathway. And when I say wrong, I just mean it'll lead you to more suffering. Because in a hijacked nervous system state, suffering feels normal. So when I say a hijacked nervous system, I want to explain what this feels like so we know what this is. And I want to explain that your hijacked nervous system can cause trouble for you in your family, can cause trouble in your personal life, can cause trouble in your business. So everyone else is going to tell you, oh, you just need to meditate more. You need to take some silent time for yourself. You need to be grateful. You need to spend some time journaling. None of that works for most of us because our nervous systems are so jacked up. I'm just saying it like it is, sisters, because when have you ever, when you finally have a free moment to yourself, have you been able to sit down and actually do a meditation and go super deep in the first 2 minutes? Has anyone been able to do that? No. The second we get done with something, we're thinking in our minds of all the to-do lists of all the things we've either forgotten, haven't done, we have to check off, we have to think about tomorrow. We can never calm ourselves. So it's hard to just be, and it's hard to stop your mind from overthinking. And how many of us have literally gone down a rabbit hole, and I call it the death spiral. We go into the rabbit hole death spiral of now this is wrong, and now this is going to be wrong, and then this is going to be wrong. And before you know it, we're tanking our energy. We're harsh with ourselves. Who's been there? Let's be honest. I've been there. We've probably all been there, right? That's because our nervous system is so amplified because we've been managing so much and bouncing from one thing to the next thing to the next thing and trying to manage so much in our masculine energy. So about 7 years ago, when I had 2 little babies under the age of 3, I was like, there's got to be a different answer here. I've got to be able to sleep. I've got to be able to be a mom. I've got to be able to be a businesswoman. How do I navigate my nervous system? So these are all the things that indicate to you that you're in a nervous system hijack. And I just want to say this so we all can be aware of it. I wasn't aware of it when I first learned this. So when your nervous system is hijacked and it's amplified, you make all of your decisions from a place of fight or flight. You're not actually making decisions from a calm, neutral place. You're much more reactive to other people. So someone might do something, and if you were super calm, you'd be like, whatever, it's no big deal. But when you're reactive and you're like, oh, she did that again, or oh, that's so annoying. Oh, I can't believe that happened. That's reactivity that is stemming from a nervous system upset. Also, if you feel anxiety at any level at all, if you're anxious, and if you sweat more than you want to, I used to sweat through shirts, literally just meeting new people because my anxiety was so high from amping my nervous system. And I think the other way that you really feel it is when you wake up in the morning and you feel like you're already behind and you feel like you have to really push or drive yourself forward to get more done. How many of us have felt these things? Almost all the time, right? Almost every day we felt this. So knowing that the hijacked nervous system is the missing link, if we can go back to basics here and start to calm the system, we are going to win beyond measure. So I'm going to start. I'm just going to give you a couple of things you can do to calm your nervous system because I feel like these are small things, but they give you big dividends. So the first thing is we start with our breath. And because I worked with Navy SEALs, I love the way they do this breathing technique. You basically do a breath where you breathe in to a count of 4. So it's like this. Hold the breath for 2 seconds. Then you're gonna breathe out for a count of 4. Just breathing and focusing on your breath like that for maybe a minute changes the game. So I'm going to give you that one as a little tip. The second one is I learned from this expert in Jinshin that if you want to reset your nervous system, you can hold each one of your fingers. So you hold the finger, you take a breath in, then a breath out. You hold the finger to feel the pulse. Once you feel the pulse, you move to the next finger. You're going to do this for every finger on your right hand, and you're going to switch to every finger on your left hand. And you're going to run through that circuit 3 times. What's cool about this is every single finger on your right hand represents a negative emotion you want to release, and every single finger on your left hand represents a positive emotion that you want to bring into your body. And it's just a really beautiful way to start being more present and getting yourself out of that suffering so that we can calm our system before we react. So whenever I have to make a big decision, if I feel any level of anxiety or fear or worry, I will sit and I'll do the breathing for maybe 30 seconds to a minute, and I'll do the finger holds for maybe 2 minutes. That's not a lot of time, but at the end of that, there's just a different level of calm in your body. And if you want to tack on that inner child work that we did in the last session together, those 3 things change the game for your nervous system. Now, what I discovered 7 years ago, though, is that those things are amazing and they're great and they're helpful and they're immediate tactics you can use right away. But if you really want to take it to the next level, you calm your your neurochemistry. That's the chemistry of the brain itself. And the neurochemistry of our brain is controlled by our gut biome, the bacteria that are growing in our gut. Now, I want to show you, ladies, because it blew my mind how changing your nervous system changes the way you look, changes the way you feel. So, this is an example. This is one of my good friends. She, in the picture on the left, looks like she's 60 or 70. She was literally early 50s. Okay. And then on this other page, this is her after she did all this work on her nervous system. She worked on the neurochemistry to calm it. And now she looks like she's in her 40s. It's the wildest thing I've ever seen. But when I learned this 7 years ago, I was like, well, I want to look younger when I'm in my 40s than I looked when I was in my 30s. And when you calm your nervous system consistently, it gives you that edge, which is incredible. So, as we come to the end of this experience, we have learned that our leadership is impacted greatly by 3 main things. If we choose to live in imposter syndrome or not, if we choose to allow ourselves to identify the core trauma pattern that's been running us our whole life, and if we choose to look at how do we make sure our nervous system is much more calm. If we cover those 3 pieces, our leadership goes to the next level and we are able to make decisions from a calm place. Now, I say all of that, and I want to tell you a little story that has nothing to do with leadership for a moment. This is my little boy in this picture with me. He had a moment the other day when we went out to see a show together. It was a children's production. And he looked at me at one point in this production. He goes, Mommy, everybody deserves a standing ovation. Have you had one? And I look at him, and all of a sudden I realize this little man at the end of the presentation, nobody stood up to clap, but he stood up to clap. And he got everybody in that auditorium to stand up to clap because he wanted these other kids to know that what they did mattered and what they did had value. I just burst into tears watching him do this. And the thing that really hit me was he's like, Mommy, I've already had 2 standing ovations, but everybody else needs one. Have you had one? And when he said that to me, I realized for so many of us in our lives, most of us have never felt like people have seen our true value. They haven't realized, we feel like people don't really know us, that we're not really stepping into our power in the way we want to. But every single one of us deserves a standing ovation for everything we've given in our lives, for all the work we've put in. And I would love to make sure that we all stand for each other moving forward into 2025 and we give each other that standing ovation so that we know we are needed and valued and wanted. And you can do this by working on yourselves, by investing into yourself in some way with real estate. There's so many ways for you to improve yourself. And that's just the beginning. So let's walk into 2025, giving ourselves standing ovations, loving who we are, and cheering for ourselves in a way that maybe nobody ever has our whole lives. Because if it starts with us, we can make all the change that we want. So, ladies, I just wanted to leave you with that. And I have a little bit of a bonus, which all the ladies here know. I'm going to send or post in just a second all the books that were the most transformational books that took me from bringing in about 20,000 a month to bringing in 185,000 while I was working for one of the companies that I created and started. I want you ladies to have this information because it blew my mind how these books only took me from that amount all the way to 185,000. It blew my mind. So I'm going to share these with you. If you want to ever give me a call, the ladies here know my information. They will share it with you. But here are the top books that really change your leadership game. And I want everyone to have access to this because some of us love to read. If you want to read it, if you want to apply it that way, go for it. But these are the top ones that really change the game for me.